The Korean War, 1950-1953, is one of the most significant conflicts in modern history, representing a turning point in international relations and the Cold War. Although it lasted for just over 3 years, the war had long-lasting effects on the Korean peninsula and global geopolitics. This blog post provides a detailed overview of the Korean War, its causes, key events, and consequences. Background: the division of Korea after World War II, Korea, which had been under Japanese rule since 1910, was liberated in 1945. However, this liberation did not bring independence. Instead, Korea was divided at the 38th parallel into 2 occupation zones. The Soviet Union controlled the north, while the United States oversaw the south. This division laid the groundwork for the Korean War. In 1948, 2 separate governments were established: the Communist Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, in the north, led by Kim Il-sung, and the Republic of Korea, ROK, in the south, under the leadership of Syngman Rhee. Both governments claimed to be the legitimate rulers of the entire peninsula, which increased tensions. The Cold War context: the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union fueled these tensions. Both superpowers used Korea as a proxy to spread their ideological influence: communism in the north and democracy, capitalism in the south. China, newly communist under Mao Zedong, also had a stake in the conflict. Outbreak of the war: the North Korean invasion. On June 25, 1950, North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel and invaded South Korea, starting the Korean War. The North Koreans, equipped with Soviet weaponry, made rapid advances, capturing the South Korean capital of Seoul within days. The invasion shocked the international community. The United Nations response: in response to the invasion, the United Nations, UN, under the leadership of the United States, quickly called for an end to hostilities and supported South Korea militarily. The Soviet Union, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, was boycotting the council at the time, which allowed the resolution to pass without a Soviet veto. U.S. and international involvement President Harry S. Truman authorized U.S. military intervention, marking the first major armed conflict of the Cold War. American forces were soon joined by troops from several UN member nations, including the United Kingdom, Canada, Turkey, and Australia. The course of the war, the Pusan perimeter, and UN counteroffensive. By August 1950, North Korean forces had pushed the South Koreans and their allies into a small pocket around the port city of Pusan in the southeastern corner of the peninsula. This area became known as the Pusan perimeter. The tide of the war changed when General Douglas MacArthur, the commander of UN forces, launched a daring amphibious landing at Inchon on September 15, 1950. This operation was a significant success and led to the recapture of Seoul. The UN forces then pushed the North Koreans back past the 38th parallel and advanced toward the Yalu River, which forms the border between North Korea and China. Chinese intervention: the UN's advance toward the Yalu River alarmed China, which feared that U.S. forces might cross the border and threaten its own security. In October 1950, China entered the war by sending hundreds of thousands of volunteer troops to support North Korea. The Chinese intervention turned the tide once again. In a series of brutal battles, including at Chosin Reservoir, Chinese forces pushed UN troops back below the 38th parallel. Seoul changed hands multiple times during the conflict. Stalemate and peace talks. Stalemate at the 38th parallel. By mid-1951, the war had reached a stalemate. Both sides were locked in fierce fighting near the 38th parallel, with neither able to gain a decisive advantage. This period of trench warfare resembled World War I, with soldiers fighting in fortified positions and enduring harsh weather conditions. Armistice negotiations. Peace talks began in July 1951, but dragged on for 2 years due to disagreements over the repatriation of prisoners of war and the exact location of the boundary between North and South Korea. During this time, fighting continued, but neither side made significant territorial gains. Finally, on July 27, 1953, an armistice agreement was signed at Panmunjom. The agreement established the Korean Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, along the 38th parallel, where it remains to this day. However, no formal peace treaty was ever signed, meaning that technically, North and South Korea are still at war. The human cost casualties. The Korean War resulted in staggering human losses. It is estimated that about 2.5 million people died during the conflict, including military personnel and civilians from both sides. The North Korean and Chinese military casualties were particularly high, with millions wounded or killed, displaced from their homes.